Hello, friends. I'm Charlene Lee. You're listening to Your New Chapter, the podcast for women navigating major life transitions who are ready to stop feeling stuck and overwhelmed and start creating the lives they desire from the inside out. Thanks for being with me today. Friends, a problem that I love coaching my clients through is how to develop a mindset that is conducive for their journey through whichever type of life transition they're walking through. In today's episode, I'll be helping you to start to address that topic of developing the right mindset. We're going to get into how all of this business of midlife crisis started and why it is in fact not a crisis, and I'm going to give you some ways to reframe your thinking. Friend, by the end of the episode, you'll be embracing your season of change rather than feeling that it's something to be ashamed of or that it's something negative. Let's go. Now, as we get into this midlife crisis conversation, I want to start somewhere that I think is really important because it will set the foundation for everything we're going to talk about today. And if you've listened to past episodes, you will have heard me say something along these lines before, and that it's that words have power. I feel so strongly about this. The words that we use to describe our experiences, they're not neutral, they carry weight. And the words we speak have the power to create the realities that we live in. We must, friends, choose to speak words of life. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. That means we have the power to speak life into our situations. I've said this before and I won't stop saying it because while we may not have control over many things in our lives, the words we choose to speak is something that we have complete control over. I know sometimes it can be hard to control our tongues, but we can train ourselves to have control over this area. Think about the difference between saying, I'm going through a crisis, and saying, I'm in the middle of a reinvention. Don't they both create such a different feeling and picture? When you call something a crisis, your nervous system responds accordingly and you send your mind and body almost into panic mode because there's this sense of urgency and panic and frenzy. When you frame things this way, the approach is often to look for the fastest way out of the discomfort rather than the most intentional way through it. But when you call it a reinvention or a new chapter or however you like to frame it, a transition or a pivot, something completely different happens. You get curious and intentional, and you'll start asking better questions, and this approach leads to a much more favorable outcome. This, my friends, is why the way that we frame things matters, because how we view things determines our approach towards it, and our approach can work for or against us. In the season of reinvention or starting over, we certainly want to be choosing the approach that will lead us to the outcome that we desire. Also, it's not just the words we speak, but the words that we allow others to speak over us. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% there yet, but something I've been working on is not accepting the negativity that people may speak over me. And sometimes they don't mean it. I understand that. For example, if you go to a doctor's office, have you realized how much negativity they speak? And they speak about things that have a slight possibility of happening as though they're certain. And I don't accept that, and I don't allow that. I don't let them tell me what I may be at risk of or whatever they want to say just because I won't do whatever screening that it is that they want me to do or whatever it is they want to sell me. All that to say that as we navigate life transitions or reinvent ourselves, we must be deliberate about what we say and how we frame things, and we must also protect ourselves from those who would speak adversely about the situations we're in. Even when people say things like, oh, you're never going to be able to do that, oh, that's really hard. All of those things, we have control over whether we accept those things or not. And I have to say, this is not a rant about doctors. I'm very grateful for the medical profession, so let's just have that on the record. Now, let's talk about this midlife crisis business for a moment, because the history of it is pretty interesting, and I think it will surprise you too. I did some research about this because I wanted to know, where did it all start? And I learned that the term midlife crisis was coined by a psychologist sometime in the 1950s, but it only really entered everyday language in the 70s through a journalist called Gail Sheehy, who wrote a best-selling book called Passages. And this is the fascinating part to me. Sheehy's original idea was actually positive. She described midlife as a period when both men and women could reassess their lives, seek change, and step into something more aligned. She saw it as an opportunity, a release, not a crisis at all. However, over time, the term got picked up, redefined, and eventually became associated with something very different. Images of instability and indulgence and irresponsibility, all of those things came into play. Sadly, the positive and the empowering intent got lost, and what replaced it was a label that essentially says, if you want to change your life in midlife, something must be wrong with you. As a coach that helps women navigate major life transitions or starting over and reinvention, I 100% reject the idea that the desire to make a change in midlife is anything close to a crisis. Instead, I view it as an opportunity to reassess and reimagine life for the next season that you're embarking on. So let's drill down a little further and think about, what does crisis actually mean? You know, the word crisis at its most basic means a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger. A turning point where things could go seriously wrong. Does that sound anything like reinventing or reimagining your life? I don't think so, friends. Is wanting more from your life a time of danger? Is choosing to reinvent yourself trouble? Is deciding that the life you've been living is no longer aligned with the woman that you've become, or a sign that something has gone seriously wrong? I think not, friends. Not really. Navigating major life transitions causes friction, and yes, problems can arise, but it's certainly not a crisis. Now, I do completely recognize that for some women who find themselves at the point of having to start over, the circumstances that brought you to this point were genuinely painful. I know it because I lived it myself. Things like a loss of a job or relationship, losing everything, or something even more difficult. I know these situations are real, and I'm certainly not dismissing that. But what we need to distinguish here, friends, is that there's a difference between the circumstances that prompted the change and the change itself. One may have been difficult, yes, but the other, the decision to start over or to want something more aligned, that's actually a response. And responses are courageous, intentional, and they can be genuinely life-giving. A crisis, on the other hand, is something that happens to you. Reinvention is something you choose, my friend. So if it's not a crisis, what is it? Let me give you several ways that you can reframe what you're actually going through. First things first, it's a choice. And choices, my friend, are powerful. Whether you willingly and excitedly chose this, or life brought you here and you've now decided to respond with intention, you are exercising agency. You are deciding how your story goes. You have the power to choose how things go from here. The second thing is that you bring everything you've learned with you. A crisis implies loss, but reinvention is not loss. It's evolution, because you're not starting from nothing. You're starting from decades of experience, wisdom, with relationships and self-knowledge that the younger version of you simply didn't have. And as we talked about in a previous episode, the title was Starting Over Doesn't Mean Starting from Scratch. You bring far more into this new chapter than you realize. This is not a crisis. This is an advantage. The next thing is that it reflects natural evolution. Wanting something different at 40 or 50 or however old you are than you wanted years ago when you were 25, for example, that's not a malfunction. It's what growth looks like. You're not the same woman you were then. Change isn't a sign that something went wrong. It's a sign that you kept growing, and growth and development are to be celebrated. The fourth thing I'll mention here is this. It's okay to want something different. I'll say it again. It's okay that you want something different. There is no rule, written or unwritten, that says the life you built in your 20s or 30s has to be the life you live forever. People change, values evolve, priorities shift, and wanting a life that reflects who you actually are now, not who you were then or not who everyone around you expects you to be, is not selfishness, it's integrity. It's the most honest thing you can do for yourself. My fifth and final tip for reframing is that it's an act of courage, not confusion. The midlife crisis narrative implies that women who want to reinvent themselves are confused, unstable, or going through something. But choosing to pursue a more aligned life, especially when it means stepping away from what's safe and familiar, that takes genuine courage. It would be so much easier to stay, to settle, to make peace with a life that's comfortable, even if it doesn't fully fit. The fact that you're not doing that, that is something to be honored, my friend. And what may look like a crisis from the outside is often a rebirth or something coming alive within you from the inside. So as you are in your journey of reinvention, think about those things to help you to reframe the way you may be thinking about it. So we have some ways that we can reframe this starting over journey. But let's think about the benefit or the power of reframing, because we need to know why it's going to benefit us to change our mindset. Friend, how you frame this season of your life matters enormously, and you get to choose how you frame it, not just for how you feel about it, but for what you actually do with it. If you frame this as a crisis, you'll approach it with panic and urgency and shame. You'll look for the fastest way out to get out of the discomfort, and your decisions will likely be made from fear rather than from clarity. But if you reframe this as a reinvention, as a choice, an evolution, or an act of change and courage, your approach will be completely different. You'll get intentional and curious, and you'll stop trying to escape the discomfort and start using this as information. And you'll make decisions from a place of self-knowledge rather than fear. And so, friend, I'm going to challenge you. I want to invite you right now, today, to consciously choose a different word for what you're going through. Not midlife crisis. Let's just throw those words out. Let's choose something that actually fits. Maybe it's reinvention. Maybe it's a new chapter. Maybe you like to say that you are making a pivot. Or maybe you're just simply describing it as growth. But choose a word that works for you. And so, my friends, let's bring this together. Today, we turned the midlife crisis label completely on its head, and we talked about where the term came from and how the original idea was actually positive before it got negatively redefined. We got clear that a life transition does not match the definition of a crisis, and we looked at some ideas of how we can reframe this, because the way we frame things determines how successfully we walk through a thing. By now, friends, I hope that you are encouraged and ready to tackle the journey from the old to the new with positivity and hope. If today's episode has shifted something for you, If you're ready to stop seeing your reinvention as something to explain or justify and start building it with real intention, I would love to have that conversation with you. There's a link in the show notes for you to go ahead and book a complimentary discovery call with me. There's no obligation, just an honest conversation about where you are and what your next chapter could look like and how we can create a plan for you to get there. Friends, thank you so much for being here today. I have loved sharing this with you. Take care of yourself this week, and I will see you in the next episode.